Greetings all. Thank you for joining me on the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I've always been fascinated by why and how people do what they do. This podcast is a way for me to put a spotlight on Africans in art, culture, media design, and all the spaces in between, and chat to them about their journeys, perspectives, and the like. It's an extension of a book I wrote a few years ago called Listen to Your Footsteps, in which I reflect on my own journey, including fatherhood, identity, and life in general. I try to bring that to every conversation I have. Enjoy. So my guest today is Lebogang Rasethaba. He's a filmmaker, and I don't know how to describe this. How many WhatsApp groups are you on? I think you're like WhatsApp pro. You could actually peddle your services as a WhatsApp person.
As a WhatsApp sort of connoisseur. Actively, the ones I'm the most active in is a dad group, a Liverpool group, a family group, and a cricket group. Those are the ones I'm the most active in.
Okay.
And then I've got a couple of years ago, there was there's some Super Bowl ads that were made, and I want to say there's a South African cat who worked on all the Super Bowl ads, and then there was a series of articles that had come out that year, and they asked one of the kind of leads on one of the agencies, like, what was the success of the campaigns that you did in the Super Bowl. And he said that it was WhatsApp groups, and I think of them in the most functional way. Mm-hmm. If I do a production, right now, let's say I'm about to start a bulk production for a gin commercial. Just over the course of that production, which is about a month, maybe give or take, I'll probably have 6 new WhatsApp groups that are just linked to that job. And you kind of get in, and then you kind of get out. So they're just this super functional tool, professionally, socially. Yeah. And I think maybe as a consequence of lockdown, I think their function became a bit more emphasized. The people that I don't see as much as I used to pre-COVID now, WhatsApp almost saved a lot of relationships in a weird way. I know you hate WhatsApp groups. Or not even, yeah. I don't know if it's people you hate or WhatsApp groups. I can never tell. You've got like this, it's not even, I don't know if it's like a very direct and deliberate way of discarding them and what they do.
Well, my wife always says I don't like people. I'm like, I just don't like them in large groups. And WhatsApp has become WhatsApp groups have become large groups. And I think we're briefly having this conversation on WhatsApp, in discovering how, in terms of making it functional, in terms of trying to build community, and discovering that, I guess what they've always said to us as human beings, like, we have a finite number of people that we can interact with or have as friends. And at some stage, the figure was like 150, but that still feels like a lot. But then not even discovering, but kind of...
150 over what time frame? Is it 150 consistent people, or say from the age of 30 to 60?
Well, I think it's more kind of, let's say, broader network or extended network.
Right.
Those figures, that figure used to be bandied around in the early days of social media, for example, like with Facebook and Twitter, where they're like, 150 is our threshold. And I think it was that figure, but just kind of realizing that so for me, it feels like too much.
150.
Even 10 feels like a lot, right? Because I interact with, I interact with a small group of people, and I have very small circles.
Have they gotten smaller with age?
Yes and no.
Right.
Because they've been that way for a while.
Small.
Yeah.
So even...
It's like how I live my life is very self-contained. and has been for a very long time, that feels like my norm.
So let's put that into perspective. So at, I guess, what you could call the pinnacle of what one could call like your social life that was a consequence of the work that you're doing, editor of a magazine, you always had to be at parties and functions. I remember seeing you at the airport in Cape Town once, and you had like you just like this, you're just like so fresh, and you had a backpack, and you had headphones, and you were reading a thing and high fiving people, and I was like, damn. I was remember, and I was just like, you waved at me, but I don't even think you really registered you were waving at me. I was just a figure. And in that moment, was it still a contained group of people because of how much you had to share of yourself?
Interesting conversation. Yeah, I'm supposed to be asking you questions about you and your life. Um, it was also always very functional.
Right.
So my line was, my job title is invited to things. Unfortunately, I have to go with it.
Okay.
So I learned how to navigate public spaces as an introvert, because I am an introvert.
Okay.
Even though people be like, yeah, but you talk, and I'm like, it depends on my environment. I learned how to navigate those spaces. I learned how to stand up in front of a group of people and speak and be comfortable. But when I leave there, so far I always describe, how I got into smoking cigars was cigars are my way of decompressing. So I'd come back from something.
Like a poetry event or something.
Whether it's a poetry event, whether it's a launch, I'd come back from something where I had to be around people, and I get home, it doesn't matter what time it is. I still do that today, although I very rarely go anywhere. And I'd have a cigar to decompress, to literally just, pull myself towards myself.
Was that like not when I say caricature, but a kind of persona that you needed to invent to be able to survive in those spaces as an introvert?
It's not a persona,
right?
Because it's me, But it's just finding a way of finding, I guess, my comfort zone within that space.
Yeah.
So how I described it, and I had to do a talk once I was putting together a talk, and this is how I kind of started to articulate or make sense of this for myself. You could see me in an event, and you'd see me in different parts of the room, and you'd assume that, I'm mingling, shaking hands, etc., etc. But what I do, and I still do, then I've always done it, I will see you across the room, and I know you, and I'll come and I'll stand with you, and we'll chat. And other people that you know, or may know both of us, will come and say, what's up? And there'll be brief chats. And then I'll see somebody else I know on the other side of the room, and I'll literally go to them.
And all the other people you have to say hello to on the way to that thing.
But on the way there, it's just like, hey, what's up? What's up? It's
cool.
not but I'll end up like there standing with another person, and I'll be with that person, say, for an hour. But if you're watching, it looks like I've talked to a whole bunch of people and I've been working the room. But I've actually just hung out with the people that I know.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, I walk into a space, I like to slide into spaces and get a sense of the space. So I don't come in and go center of the room.
Right.
I like to kind of slide in. So I've walked behind banners because I hate this. Now I must stand and take pictures. I never know what to do with my hands. I never know what to do with, I'm not like people who have like signature poses and stuff.
Yeah.
I never know what to do. So I'd bypass that.
Okay.
Whenever I can. But anyway, I got a question for you. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I mean, at different stages, when I was young, I was super sporty. So I always had weird dreams of doing something I still continue to be quite sporty today. So I thought I'd do like something, some sports related thing. So what I did in high school, I did two things. Two things kind of consumed me as a kid: sports and art. So it's either like playing sports in some way or like or doodling. And that's kind of, it's not too dissimilar to what I'm doing right now. Except my doodles have kind of taken a form, which is filmmaking that is, yeah. Then as I grew older, I started having this like vision of myself as a nomad. Then I got to university, I got exposed to like film. When I got to university, I did a economics degree my first year, and I flunked terribly. And the deal with my parents was that you can do art when you're later. I mean, you can do art later in life, but you have to get a foundation that you can fall back onto. And so they're like, you can do arts later. I mean, I remember being a kid and going out. I remember this one memory so vividly. I was 12 years old. We had gone on a trip through the Kruger National Park with my family. Kind of the first time we were living as a nucleus. My dad had just come back from exile, and he was just kind of collecting all these kids. And then we went on this epic road trip through the Kruger National Park, and we're driving one day, and we saw a leopard sitting on a rock, and the sun was setting, and it was just so incredible. And we're like the first car there. So we like arrive, see the leopard, and then we just sat there. And in the middle of this, my dad was just like, turns around and goes, if you want to become a fine artist, just know that you'll never be able to create experiences like this for your family. I was like, what? So
that's the irony, because I go, the first thing that came to my mind is that's the standard for you if you're going to become, for example, an artist. That's the standard for you. So what you've just seen in nature, or what you're looking at in nature, is, that's what you have to reach.
Yes.
Whereas for him, it was just like, yo, man, like if you want to see that again,
you cannot.
You cannot be
the thing
messing around in that.
Yeah. And we'd like drive, and then we'd get to like a traffic light, and there'd be those guys selling those art on the side of the road, and he was just like, if you want to be, and he's like, you see that guy? It's like, yes, like he's a really nice guy. I'm sure he's a great guy, but he's an artist and he's poor. It created in my mind this view that artists are always poor. And I think in society, there is this sort of like notion that artists are poor. And there's so many weird stories that have kind of reinforced that narrative. And I feel mainly as people in the creative space that isn't commercialized, we fail to see how we can participate in commercial activity, right? So like in the gentrification of like Maboneng or Bram, whatever, we kind of never really saw a part of how we could create commercial value from that. Whereas if you look at like other artist communities in Berlin or London or New York, artists become part of the sort of revenue generating conversation. So I think maybe now for the first time, and that's why like some of my friends that are doing well, particularly, and aren't afraid to sort of display the ways in which they are doing well, is super important to show other people of another generation that it is possible to be in the creative fields and still be able to create sort of like create a scenario in which you could see a cheetah or a leopard at a sunset in the Kruger National Park for your family. So yeah, even to this day, I still kind of like have those kind of like twitches where I just wake up in the middle of the night and I just hear my father saying to me, the dream is, you see, I'm sitting there and the leopard just kind of like turns around and sees me and my broke family and then runs away. So, yeah, I think it was always something that felt really far away, and it wasn't. It's how hard I had to fight to become what I do today. That, and when I say fight, I don't, and I'm not trying to like make it seem like my dad or my parents were particularly antagonistic. They just had no frame of reference for it. I remember my dad saying to me, name one successful black filmmaker, and I was just like, Spike Lee. You know what I mean? Because we're walking essentially a path with very little footprint. And yeah, so that is kind of what becomes part of your identity and teaches you how to sort of like understanding that part of what you have to do is like fighting to survive, to be heard, to be understood, you know what I mean? To even just, and you hear a lot of people talk about this. I mean, I think the easiest way to frame it is we talk about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of we don't really spend enough time maybe interrogating why we have imposter syndrome. You know what I mean? Just like you going to a talk and they're just like, Kojo, here, we're going to pay you X amount of money and you just need to talk. And you're like, what? You know what I mean? You spend so much time writing poems, writing books, investing in yourself intellectually, and now someone is going to pay you to talk. And you don't realize that all those things that you did all those years then is what they're really paying for.
Yeah.
The value comes from that lineage of you just working so hard. I mean, you know this more intimately than anyone else, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's what's it called? The Dunning-Kruger effect, so there's imposter syndrome, but there's also it's like the people that kind of don't know better will go and wing it. Whereas it's like the people who really know, the person who feels like the imposter, but it's actually
the real deal.
Right. And the opposite of that is this kind of Dunning-Kruger effect where it's like, the person who's not the real deal will just kind of go and wing it because they don't know what they don't know. And there's the confidence behind, they'll back themselves up without the knowledge.
I'm not like trying to speak down on anybody, but as someone who has been so like consistent and diligent in crafting your views, your perspectives, and your craft, what is your feeling when you see young people who haven't really taken the time to invest? You'll seldom speak about a particular topic unless you've you have a very clear sense of the ins and outs of that based on research and reading. But a lot of people, I try to listen to a podcast. I'm not going to say who it is. It's a very popular South African podcast. And it was just dudes just like, it was just like words and words and words with no real insight, any sense of like reading, any sense of like research. And I was just like, but it's such, you know what I mean? How do you feel about that? Like, I've always wondered for where you are in life with everything that you've been through. What is your view on that?
I have my lane and I'm comfortable. So it took me a long time to get comfortable with and figure out what my lane is.
Okay.
Right. And also now where I am now is that I don't, people say, how do you stay relevant? And I'm like, relevant to who?
Interesting.
I don't need to be relevant to anyone. I have my lane, I have my place in, if you say broader society or amongst my friends or in my community, etc. And I'm comfortable with that. My focus is on living life the way I want to live life. And I've acquired a new interesting habit that has pissed off a couple of people.
Which is?
I've had debates with people younger than I am. Somebody in their 20s or somebody in their 30s. And I've gotten to the point where you and I having a debate about something, we don't quite agree. You've stated what you feel and what you think, and I've stated what I think and what I feel. And I did it at a cousin's birthday dinner.
How long ago?
In November. And there was a young woman it seems I'd met her before when she was much younger. She was like late 20s. And we're having a whole conversation. And she was being very deep and using lots of big words.
The words.
And I was sitting at the kitchen counter just trying to finish off some work while people are arriving for this. Like, midweek, just going to quick celebration of a birthday. And then she said something and I was like, listen, sometimes, I think it was Richard Feynman who said, if you want to know how well you know a topic, explain it to an 8-year-old. And where you haven't got the words to be able to explain it to an 8-year-old, it means that's where the gap in your knowledge is. So go back and kind of read on that, because sometimes we'll use a word, we'll use a big word or a longer word,
right?
Because we can't break that thought down into the simplest language. And And then we got into this whole conversation around raising children.
Oh boy.
And I'm like, do you have children? She's like, no, but I have a nephew. And I'm like, I'm like the father and blah, blah, blah. So we went back and forth a bit. And eventually I went, you know what? It's fine. Let's chat in 10 years' time. And she's like, what you mean? And I'm like, we're not going to get beyond this point.
Right.
You've shared your opinion. I've shared my opinion. I believe that mine is based on also 15 years of experience beyond theory. Like, I have children, I've gone through that process. So perhaps let's have the conversation again when you actually have a child of your own, as opposed to, I had nephews and nieces before I had children as well. And it pissed her off to no end that I wouldn't carry the conversation. For me, it's like we go around a little bit.
Then you see it. And
then it's like, okay, well, we don't need to, you're not going to convince me, I'm not going to convince you.
Yeah.
We've both stated our cases.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah. So is the thing that is pissing off a lot of people, it's not really, I mean, in her view, do you think she felt like you're being condescending?
Yeah, possibly.
Do you think that you're being condescending?
No.
Okay.
But I really don't care. That's the beauty of age, man. Like, I discovered, so my father.
I love this conversation. I don't even know where it's going, but I'm just really excited.
No, that's cool.
because of reading your book.
And for me, it's weird because
I read your book and I'm just like, as I was driving here, I'm just like, I hope this guy mentions something about his dad, because that's what I want to talk about that lot.
Well, so my father would mess up people's names, like my friends. And you would, like, I'd repeat it all the time.
Yeah.
And he would have his own pronunciation. Or, like, Tsepo is Tabo.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, it's Tsepo, right?
Yeah.
And he looked so unbothered by it. And he used to frustrate me. And as a child, I used to get angry.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I'm not old, but particularly after 40, and like 40, 45, like, I got it. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do this man? 75 years old. He's lived a full life. Like, what, you're going to make him, he's not even going to feel bad about the fact that he's messing up the name. Like,
I don't even think he realizes.
He's not even, there's more important things in his mind that he needs to think about. And so, do you remember during Nelson Mandela's, was it the memorial at the stadium?
Yeah.
And Bishop Desmond Tutu came on. I was like, hey, hey, because people were being rowdy.
Yes.
And I remember being on Twitter then and watching people going, he's embarrassing us in front of the world, etc., etc. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you going to do to this old dude?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing that you could do or say to him.
Yeah.
That he's going to be like, oh, my bad, I'm embarrassing us the world. No, he's being.
Yeah.
He's reached the stage where he's comfortable just being.
Yeah.
And for me, I find I'm comfortable, like, I am who I am.
Yeah.
Warts and all. That's what my focus is.
Do you not have any sense of, I don't even know what to call it, an obligation to impart the wisdom to younger people? Like, just go out on a bit more of a limb to younger people, or even not even younger people, just people around you, to just share. You know what I mean? Or I do. You do share. But you're not. But beyond a point, you're not willing to share if someone is obtuse, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and it's sharing in different ways. Like, it's I think it was Lebogang who once said, when she was asked, when giving back became the thing, like, all of a sudden it's like, are you giving back? How are you giving back? And I think she was interviewed. It was either her or Tandiswa, but interviewed and asked, how are you giving back? And she's like, I don't have to tell you.
I'm just doing it.
Like, I don't do it for people to see that I'm giving back. So in terms of, let's call it sharing or whatever, it's the WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
It's my one-on-one interactions with people. It's
Your Instagram, I mean, just the books that you share, your newsletter, that is all versions
yeah.
of you
So
sharing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So by nature, I mean, I do it. I do it anyway. Going back to my father. That's how my father navigated the world. So there are many people who, to this day, well, I mean, like the other day I posted, it was his birthday, or it would have been his birthday, and I posted on, I think, Instagram as well as on Facebook, because Facebook also, my Facebook is very contained. It's people I grew up with and it's people that I know. And like without fail, there's a whole bunch of people, different generations, different age groups who will go. There's an uncle of mine who's a good friend of my father's in Zimbabwe, who is in his 70s or heading to his 80s. And he commented. And then there were my younger siblings' friends who are in their, let's say, late 30s, early 40s. And they commented. And everybody commented because of the impact he had on their lives.
Right.
And that impact was primarily one-on-one.
Sure.
So do I feel the need to kind of go out and be a speaker and stand on platforms? No, it's just in interactions with people. For me, that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
Also, I've realized that the world is now my children's world. And maybe because I've been in the public spaces. So it took me a while to make sense of it.
Yeah.
My son is 15, my daughter's 11. More and more I realize it's their world. I can still open certain doors for them. That's my job.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't need to be out there. I don't need to be relevant. I've been out there.
You've been relevant.
Yeah, I've been relevant. Now it's literally just living life the best way possible.
I think about that a lot. This relevant thing is just so interesting to me because when I started out as a filmmaker, and it wasn't necessarily like I became. I was just naturally doing stuff, was like making documentaries and blah blah blah, and then the way in which my work was spoken about in a particular kind of way, and I kind of assumed that identity, and I was like, like young and hip and fresh and cool. So I just kind of leaned into that and I profited from that. But now, touching 40, I'm a dad of two. That's no longer necessarily my identity. I'm not, you know what I mean? Someone was just like, yeah, I want to do an interview and put you on the cover of some youth magazine because you're like the voice of young people. And I was just like, me still, you know what I mean? Particularly because I think of my trajectory, that there's a very specific moment in my life at the beginning where I had a very steep upward kind of trajectory. And now things are kind of starting to plateau a little bit.
Oh, what was that? So
it was a confluence of Future Sign of Mzansi plus the Mlangeni film plus a captive audience on the internet. So when me and Ntato shit, and Ntato's like rise at the point what he was doing, and also I think Future Sound of Mzansi really like created a style of filmmaking that like people weren't particularly familiar with at the time. You could just make a film with like a 7D and that's all we had was a 7D and a hard drive, and we edited the film just anywhere we could just find a flat surface, and it was just like, whoa, you can make films like that. And when I say captive audience, for example, like so the way you describe in Facebook was just like a group of our friends, and everybody was genuinely interested in what the other person was doing. And when we shared the poster, literally all our friends reshared it and commented and spoke about it, because the internet was a community of people who were sort of creating, but also were active consumers of each other's work. So that whole stuff kind of created a springboard for me, and that's what I said. People were throwing words at me that I sort of gravitated towards, but I guess I'm on the other side of that, you make a film now on the internet, or you put up on the internet, and it just kind of goes and disappears.
Drowned out.
Yeah, drowned out. Share it today, tomorrow, and there's people aren't really necessarily like consuming, not necessarily like active. People aren't really like consuming my work because they're like genuinely interested. Young people will be like, oh, I want to see. They were like wanted to watch my films, but not necessarily interested in the films. I'm more interested in me as a persona, so they can emulate that. That's, I guess, what I was also trying to find out from you as well, like navigating the different stages of like self through work. And
So what's interesting for me with you was how I perceived you was as the kind of like, make of documentaries, like an semi-activist filmmaker.
yeah,
Without the commercial side.
Yeah.
So like pushing a cause, chasing after a cause, etc., etc. Because of how I guess also because kind of what you were putting out as compared to, Tabang, etc., where it's like whether you're seeing more of the commercial stuff that they're doing. How have you balanced that? Or how have you navigated that? Because it's only later on that I've realized that you do commercial work, right?
Absolutely.
And you have to do commercial work because that's how you live.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing wrong with doing commercial work.
Yeah.
But because you were framed in such a strong way down this alley.
Yeah.
How have you made sense of that?
I think what I often speak about is like kind of, I guess, what you could call the nexus of truth and beauty. And advertising has got all the resources, all the talent, and all the tools. And so, advertising industry is like, it's incredible. You've got like some of the best in the world. And I went there to learn from these things and these tools and these people, and take from that and use that to take my documentaries and elevate them into something beautiful. Because I think there was always this perception that documentaries were like, you hear words like guerrilla and real and gritty, and those concepts are divorced from beauty.
Yeah.
And I guess what I've been canvassing for is to say, well, actually, you can have these things can coexist. So you can have a documentary that is, pursuing high stratums of truth, but still have cinematic beauty in it. So that is the kind of more like theoretical way, the theoretical kind of relationship between these two. But in a practical, everyday today, I try and make like at least one documentary a year.
Okay.
And you kind of come in and out, and then commercials, you kind of keep the clock ticking over, the wheel of commerce turning, the plate turning.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm like working on this, like, as the continuation of the People versus kind of trilogy that I made. And now, actually, I really liked what you said earlier, because that was always the challenge for us when we made those films. Is like, how do you take these like really intense, socially charged moments and just kind of find a way to distill it to like, how would you explain this to like, how would you explain like patriarchy to like a teenager from Orange Farm? So in making these films, that was always who I was trying to appeal to.
Okay.
And not everybody got that, and that's why people would like criticize them for not being able to expand on a particular situation with any real depth. And I was just like, well, I wasn't going to do that for you. I'm trying to make these people who are somewhat marginalized from this conversation be able to enter it by taking that word and doing that, which was my favorite. It was my favorite type of work to do, because it was just a bit more meaningful. I think it's like we're in a big moment of cataloging, and there was a lot of like great literature and inventions, like in the last 80 years or whatever. And there was like amazing writers and thinkers and films, and we grew up having to actively find those things. And in order to be into, I had my young cousin, he's like 20, 24, 25, and he came to my house yesterday, and we have like all these magazines like ID, Dazed and Confused. And he was just like, what is that? And I was like, it's magazines. He's like, why do you guys have so many? I was just like, because there was a time at which if you wanted to be into something, the only way to be into it was to actively source it. You have to go to the magazine shop in Rosebank and go buy ID. And it was a month old and it was like 100 Rand. And if you went to hip hop, you had to go, if you're into graffiti, you had to go, you know what I mean? If you were into anything, you had to go see it. And so we did that. And so I really appreciate what you say. It's like children's worlds, because now they are in a world where everything's just been cataloged. So if you want to listen, so like your newsletter is an amazing catalog of literature. So you go, these are the 10, or well, I say 10, but with you, it's like 47 books I've read this year, which is not cool, by the way, but we'll get to that later. These are the 47 books I've read this year. That's an amazing catalog of literature, particularly what we're speaking about in the group about like Black male vulnerability. So you go, in this moment in time, I'm reading a lot of books that have got like Black male protagonists that are speaking quite frankly about their vulnerabilities, even if they don't even realize it, even though that's not even necessarily the intention. I was reading Thomas Sankara's biography, and it's not positioned as someone talking about their vulnerabilities, but when you read it, you get a sense of his struggles, for example. So, which is, I guess my point is where we are right now is this amazing moment where now we're just creating all these amazing catalogs. Netflix is an amazing catalog. Spotify is an amazing catalog, where our kids can now come into the world and go, right, I need to understand this particular topic, and here's a catalog of that. And I think being a part of that is pretty special. I think I find that quite like enriching.
This is the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a journey into the life and perspectives of Africans living on their own terms. I also have an email newsletter, a book, and even music playlist available on my site, kojobuffer.com. Let's get back to the conversation. How do you go about deciding in terms of the documentary? Because, so I mean, as you're saying, we don't, and it's weird because you said it, and I'm like I've watched a lot of documentaries, and I've watched a lot of beautiful documentaries, but I don't, until that moment, I realized that I'd look at international ones and see the beauty in them, etc., etc. But local ones tend to also feel an attempt to be so serious that there is no, it doesn't feel like there's beauty in that. I'm not sitting there and kind of going, the shots in it sometimes draw me away from the conversation. It just feels focused on the intensity as opposed to finding that nexus.
Yeah, I think it might not be such a direct consequence, but I do think it is how documentary kind of was introduced to South Africa, and it was primarily like a propaganda tool, and it was very specific about disseminating a particular message with one particular perspective. And there's no space for beauty in those type of films. So when even TV, when it was introduced, it was just like a big propaganda machine, which is like news and parliament and broadcast. So I just generally think we haven't had the opportunity to explore beauty within that medium, within that construct yet. So yeah. So we're getting, how do I choose what form?
Yeah, how do you like that one documentary a year?
Yeah, so now, for example, I'm working on a mental health episode for the People versus kind of series. It was meant to be a trilogy, but now it's just like it's going on, and it's quite not bittersweet, but like it's quite interesting because I thought by now that there would have been, and this is Dylan and I from MT, we were talking about. He's just like, surely there's got to be another Lebogang Rasethaba out there who was where you were when I made the first one. You know what I mean? That's also something that I've found particularly sort of disheartening, to be like, come on, Dylan, you can't be coming to me and asking me to make a film about these issues for young people. There's got to be newer, fresher voices out there. But I think right now I'm kind of selfishly trying to make documentaries that are going to force me to become a better filmmaker. Okay. And what I mean by that is that this mental health docu is not, without sounding arrogant, I mean, the research and the content and how you approach it is quite serious and quite deep and quite sensitive. But because I've done it before, Like I've done it with the patriarchy film. I've done it with the Rainbow Nation film. It's like raised in patriarchy, and you know what I mean. Like then they're not always pushing me to become a better filmmaker from a technical perspective. So right now I need to find a film that's going to force me to get out of my comfort zone, because I think I'm like made like 9 documentaries, and after the 5th and 6th one, you get into a bit of a rhythm and a pattern and a flow, and I'm starting to execute ideas that I've already mastered better. So it's just the idea of like the golden, what is it? Like the idea that we haven't really made any new innovations in society. We're just getting better at marketing the old ones.
Yeah.
So I need to find a way to become innovators as a filmmaker, as opposed to just marketing my old ideas or package them in a fresh way.
It's like, as a writer, I know that there's certain words that I always come back to, and there's certain words that I always use. And it's easy for me to write a particular way, like, because that muscle has been exercised. So
Yeah.
I can write a magazine or a media article literally like in an hour or 2.
Yeah.
Because I've exercised that. But I struggle to write poetry now because I stopped writing poetry regularly over
Yes.
10 years ago.
Yes.
And it's very easy to just kind of, just fall into that groove.
Yeah.
And not kind of take a step back and go, okay, how do I do this differently, or how do I do this better?
Like, would you like forcing yourself to write a book with like long verbose sentences? Like your
No, I have always written long verbose sentences.
but you call it out in your book, or I don't know if it was in a book or like an interview that you're saying where you're like, you want to maybe refine the way you write in short, punchier sentences that are a lot more descriptive and to the point, as opposed to just like waffling.
And I still haven't got it right. But what's interesting is, like, I guess with poetry, when I used to write poetry, poetry forced me to, let's say, condense or distill thoughts and feelings into emotion. But the place where I did it a lot more was actually Twitter. So Twitter, what I loved about Twitter, particularly in the beginning, I mean, I've been on Twitter since 2008, I think, was you had 140 characters. So it forced you to be succinct, but also very clear. So I learned, I had to learn how to be able to communicate a thought or a feeling in 140 characters in a way that I'm not misunderstood by the majority. Which is the thing that, as a writer, I enjoyed about it.
Not a lot of people, I think, would ever admit the benefits of like something that today has got such a sort of charged and somewhat divisive kind of energy attached to it, like Twitter right now. Particularly in a moment like where we are right now, over the past weekend, where it's been super sensitive and just. But I think that like it's quite refreshing to hear you speak about like how something like that could be so beneficial to your craft. You know what I mean?
But that's what it means. I wrote a blog post called The Twitter Abyss, and I wrote it during lockdown. Because, I mean, I went through the gambit, I guess. I went through the journey that most people went on. So I joined September 2008. And by 2009, I was having disagreements with my wife because she felt I was spending too much time on Twitter. And in those days, there was no app and stuff. So I was doing it on a BlackBerry on the site, right? And I have relationships that started on Twitter that endure till this day with people I've never met in my life.
Oh, wow.
So the early days were very different. And in fact, when I joined Twitter, it was the tech guys and some of the hip hop guys.
It was like knowledgeable people. Makosha talks about that a lot. She goes, the community that she forms on Twitter is like knowledgeable people that are sharing interesting and somewhat building.
Yeah, so I mean that's what it was. I mean, I met a guy recently. He's a Ghanaian guy based in Canada. Over the years, we've discovered we have common friends, but we got to know each other on Twitter specifically.
Early Twitter.
Early Twitter.
Right.
And 2010, for example, 2009, 2010, there's another friend of mine who's a DJ in Ghana, called DJ Black. And on Friday nights and Saturday nights, he had a shows, party show. And we would tune in online, and there'd be 5, 6 of us, all kind of first generation, second generation Ghanaians, and be sitting in different parts of the world, be listening to the show.
Is he playing Ghanaian music or just worldly music?
No, it's
just good music.
Mainly hip hop.
Okay.
But he would be playing music, we'd be listening, and we'd be chatting on Twitter about that particular song. And so because of that, we got to know each other. I mean, there's poets, there's people in the US there's a guy now, we now interact on Instagram. We'd been following each other on Twitter from maybe 2010, 2011.
And when you say we're sharing and we get to know each other, are you sharing stuff that is sort of an extension of how you met? So is it about music and da-da-da-da, or have you gone over and now sharing like family and other stuff?
So with this guy specifically, for example, he stepped off Twitter at some stage and then sent me an email. He has a daughter who's the same age as my son.
Okay. Wow.
And he stepped off because he was having problems in the family with the wife. And he was like, look, I need to take a break from this stuff. So he dropped me an email just to give me a heads up to say, hey, listen, this is what's going on. So I'm not active here anymore. Yeah. So if you need to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me like this.
Yeah.
So it's different levels, it's different levels of bond. But there were a lot of, I sat on Twitter the night Michael Jackson died.
Oh boy.
And was on Twitter till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with a group of us in different parts of the world, including in Joburg, like friends in Joburg.
And where were you at the time? Were you in Joburg?
I was in Joburg.
Okay.
But literally flipping between BBC and CNN, and somebody sitting in London and they're flipping through their channels, and somebody sitting in New York and they're flipping through their channels, trying to figure out what's going on.
That sounds like such a beautiful and advert for the internet and Twitter. It feels
that's what
so
it was.
Pure and wholesome.
That's what it was. Let's say till about, I'd say 5, 6 years ago.
When was it when we saw? I think her name is Queen Twerk. I remember this so specifically because that's the moment I realized that this place is going to become so toxic. There was a video of a lady, I think her name was Queen Twerk, and someone was hitting her on the head with like a flaccid penis. There's a video. And I don't even know how I caught on that, because I was never on Twitter, because when I was living in Beijing, social media was banned.
Yeah.
I jumped on late onto these things. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. But I do remember that, there was a point at which things flipped. And that was like the beginning of things flipping. And now we are just sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen like a snowboarder or a skier falling down a hill, and they just like look like they call it the rag doll when they lose control. And that's where we are with like social media, where it's just we're in this like free fall speed, just like plummeting into just chaos and the depths of like the darkest parts of like human beings.
I think to a certain extent, as painful as it is, I think we need it.
Need what?
We need all of this stuff to kind of break down.
Sure.
Because we had also gotten to the point where so I was doing a talk on storytelling the other day, and I was like, for me, the story got lost the day we all bought into the medium being more important than the story itself.
Boom.
Which was like the platforms. Right. So at some stage, because, and I always talk about this, like the cave wall was never the important thing, was the painting on the wall, right? The the book, the paper was not the important thing. It was
The words.
the words that were in it. The camera and the TV were not the important things. It was the story that was being told visually, right? But then when we hit this stage, we had the internet, we had social media, and then we hit this point where it was like, that's what was most important. Like Facebook was important and Twitter was important. So it was just the delivery mechanism became the thing, because that's where everybody's trying to put their money. And then it's like Uber's the important thing, or what is it, Airbnb, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, no, I want a place to be able to sleep comfortably. I want to be able to get from point A to point B safely without always having to drive, right? And that's kind of the world that we found ourselves in. When you look at websites and when you look at like the death of magazines or print, and then people are like, no, it's the internet's important and free content, everything else. But we've got clickbait and there's so much noise, and it's like, okay, what's really important here?
And things got also super autobiographical in a way in which I didn't think served the art in a way. I think there was a lot more emphasis put on like the people doing it versus what they were actually putting out. Like I remember this specifically, we during this Future Sound of Mzansi craze, where a magazine asked us, they're like, we want to promote your film. We're like, great. And then we sent them a photo of the poster, and they were like, yeah, but we're wondering if you could send us a poster of you and Spook. I was like, why? They weren't promoting Star Wars using photos of George Lucas. That's ridiculous. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think the autobiographical era has then meant that we aren't necessarily interested in the content itself and what's being produced. And I also think we should burn this word content on. And I was also I was very responsible in the proliferation of that word by saying we're creating content as a part of our company. But, now's not the time to be so self-deprecating. The point is, it's just, the emphasis is no longer like on what the actual outcome, the actual craft, the art, and the technology is something that's far more important than the actual mechanism of creation, which is also super troubling, I guess. And
it's a whole branding thing, the whole personal branding thing.
Personal branding.
So I have a friend of mine who used to say, brand has values and it has a promise. So if you as a person feel you're a brand,
oh boy,
what's your brand promise?
Oh boy.
And I always felt uncomfortable with this idea of, a person as a brand. And my only pinned tweet, which I've had for ages, is human being human. Because for me, it's like your reputation, how you're perceived, et cetera, how you live your life. That's being human. The professional aspect of you is a part of who you are. The personal aspect is a part of who you are. So I'm not, people go, okay, so, brand Kojo, or how are you doing your brand? I'm like, yo, man, I'm just a guy. I'm a human being navigating the world.
So you're not playing the brand game. You have to. You kind of have to. I don't even think you have a choice.
I would say I'm not playing the game because I'm just trying to live my life in the best way possible. By doing that, somebody can look at that and package it from a brand perspective, right? But that's not my intention. I'll interact with what makes sense to me. I won't interact with what doesn't make sense to me. I've done, another word which I hate, influencer campaigns.
Oh boy!
So I've partnered with brands, but I have to buy into like what I'm doing. If I don't buy into it, if there's no personal connection, I can't do it. Like it's literally impossible for me to kind of go, okay, I'll do that, because I don't see how to do it. And I've turned things down when people around me are like, but dude, we could help you out with XYZ. I was once asked to host during COVID, and they were like, we want you to talk about XYZ, but we want you to cook while you're talking about XYZ. We want it within context of you cooking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't cook. Like, you can have your opinions whether it's a good or bad thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that at home, my wife, and she fortunately loves to cook as well. Like, I won't burn an egg. Like, I'm not absolutely incompetent.
Yes.
But I haven't done it enough, haven't practiced it enough to be able to feel
On
comfortable.
camera, talking about.
Comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
And I was like, guys, I don't cook. And the wife and a good friend was just like, dude, like, just cook, do it. Like, we can prepare everything off camera. Like, we can chop up everything.
And that was an inauthentic representation of who
and
you
I'm
are.
just like, no.
Yeah.
Like, I
don't
maybe it's how I was raised, but like, I can't do that.
Another example of this conversation we're having is we in our group have all been approached in lots of different ways to be part of, I don't even know what to call it, I guess to be some form of like cultural mediator in this gender war, where we've been asked to essentially become the face or the voice or the this of a campaign about like not in my name and protect my women and that, you know what I mean? All of those attempts, which were, pretty valuable attempts, I'd say, to try mitigate this kind of disastrous trajectory on. But just the sort of inauthenticity of it and the lack of understanding and the lack of nuance made all of us kind of turn down a few of these things, right?
Because I've done one. So, for example, I've done one or two.
That felt right to you.
That felt right because I'm talking about my specific, so my understanding or my context or my experience of it. And that's the thing is, I guess it's also the difference between being the absolute authority, because a lot of the stuff seems absolute, right? It's like all of a sudden somebody's speaking on some stuff and you're involved in a campaign is not your opinion. You're being presented as an expert.
Moral absolutism.
Yeah.
Right.
As opposed to just look, this is one opinion. This is one thought. This is where I'm coming from. It's not necessarily everybody's.
Yeah.
But this is where I'm coming from.
At a particular point in time.
At a particular point in time.
To the situation at this point in time.
Exactly.
And I don't think that people really have a sense of that. You're going to be beholden to a view that you might grow out of in the next 3-4 months, which is also kind of the challenging thing about these things, right?
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, I guess if one is fleeting with how they make the decisions, then chances are one would think that their opinions are also as fleeting. Whereas if you hold certain opinions, good or bad, and you've thought about it, and you for example, you introspect quite a bit on things, so you'll find that certain views that you have, although not absolute, there's been enough thought behind that opinion that for it to change,
okay, I see what you mean.
Would also take time, because I'm expecting it to change as you change, and we don't change overnight.
No.
Let's talk about Mutant. Just diverge a little bit. What was the process? I mean, what was the process of creating Mutant?
So, I'll tell you the short version of the story. It might sound all esoteric, but Mutant was a film that was supposed to make at that time, because it wasn't the film that we had set out to make. We had set out to make a completely different film, profiling 3 different musicians that represented 3 topics that we were interested in. So one of the big learnings from Future Sound of Mzansi was 60 musicians all just talking about random things. But the 2 chapters that people really connected with was the one about Mojava and the one with Felix. So we're like, okay, so why don't we take the learnings from that and kind of make a film that is a little bit more condensed in terms of subject matter, focus on characters. You can still have as many people speaking to it, but you follow 3 characters as they navigate their lives. A girl, Kanye, from the Eastern Cape, was living in Sweden, and what we thought was, we thought she had a spiritual calling, so interested in just how she's navigating the world of modern lights, camera action, to then having to balance that. Isaac was one of the characters, and that was quite an obvious story. And then one of the other guys who actually were looking to follow was Ricky. So we shot with Kanye for like a week. Then we shot with Isaac for like another week. And then we came to Joburg to shoot with Ricky. And then things didn't pan out. So we didn't get to shoot with Ricky. So yeah, me and Spook one day were sitting and we basically just had the conversation that I had with you, but over a couple of days to be like, listen, man, there's an opportunity here to make one film, one important, amazing film about one issue as opposed to something that. So yeah, we threw everything behind Isaac. But I remember Isaac was also such a compelling character who demanded us as filmmakers to sort of like, when I say take him seriously, so we had shot with Kanye for like 5 days, and then we're shooting with Isaac. And on the first day of shooting with Isaac, we went to Kailicha. And while we were shooting with Isaac randomly on the street, we ran into Kanye, and they were sharing a greeting, and then we were like, Isaac was like, so I'm like, yo, let's shoot some scenes together with you two hanging out. It'll be a nice way to segue in and out of the chapters. And Isaac was just like, yo, you said today was my day. So today we're going to shoot with just me. You said to me, for the next 5 days, we're shooting with you. So can you honor your promise to me? And that is evidence of a subject that is saying to you, like, this is my story, take me seriously, but I'm buying in. Whereas we couldn't get, on the one side, we couldn't get Kanye to answer our calls, and it was difficult to get with Ricky. So that's what I mean. Without getting too esoteric, the film demanded to be made. It made us make it. And then it was self-funded. Isaac was, as much as he was a giving subject, it wasn't always easy to find him. So in order to find him, it was at least 2 or 3 days, because he was last seen in Muizenberg, and then you phone that cousin in Muizenberg, like, no, it's now in Athlone, and you phone that cousin, and then you eventually find him. So every time we had a phone, it was like a week of trying to find him. But when we were together with him, yeah, he just gave us a lot. He changed a lot over the course of making the film. We changed a lot. A labor of love, 6 years in the making, all kind of out of pocket, like lots of ideological debates between myself and Ntato, very strong opinions about particular things. The film going in this particular way. We had a big chapter about cultural appropriation that we kind of took out. So, but in order to take out what is essentially 7 minutes of a film, it takes about 2 weeks of debating. And I think that's like, I share this stuff because I think it's important for people to know what it takes to make a film like that. And I think,
especially with collaboration, and collaboration is an important.
It's super important, and to trust, and also teaches you to really be able to, when I say fight for the idea, I mean me and Ntato, and later on Sfiso, when we were debating an idea, it wasn't about, like, it wasn't personal. We're speaking about the work and being able to remove yourself. Like, if you put together an edit idea and it doesn't work for the film, and having the humility to accept that we need to lose this, even though you've spent a day trying to convince the film and your collaborators that it needs to be there, and having your ideas fail in front of screen, and having the humility to accept that your partner told you at 9 a.m. this is not going to work, and you pushed and pushed and pushed. Those are the big sort of like lessons that you'd want people to understand about.
And I guess also not feeling the need to even say, I told you so.
No.
So it's like both sides.
Absolutely.
It's both sides.
Absolutely,
it's like
right.
The one side going, but dude, I told you this morning. But just kind of being able to leave it be.
Yes. And be like, okay, guys, let's start again tomorrow. What lessons did we learn from that? And then you come back tomorrow and you keep going. So yeah, and I think it like really also kind of sobers you up to the realities of what being a director is. And I think people have a lot of misconceptions about what being a director is. There's this notion of you as this kind of amazing creative custodian of a vision that everybody's going to get behind. And it's really a job more of like a servitude. And the film, it has to serve Isaac, it has to serve the community and the people on which he speaks on behalf of. It has to be in service of something greater than yourself. So that film really taught us that. But really, just to close on this particular issue, there's also then making the film, and then 6 years, and it's really beautiful, and just broadcasters rejecting it, networks rejecting it, film festivals being like, whatever. no, we're not interested in this because of the zeitgeist at the time. It's important to remember that Isaac the Mutant dropped at the same time that film about that guy who has a relationship with a fucking penguin. Or not a penguin, an octopus or some shit. My octopus might teach me how to be an octopus, whatever that film is. That was the zeitgeist at the time. And if you make a film that isn't also relevant to the zeitgeist, it might just die in some obscure corners of the internet, which is kind of what I was speaking about earlier as well. But I think only now that the world is opening up now, it's really got a second wind, which is really encouraging because it's so discouraging to work for so long on a project and everybody's just like, ugh. All the captive audience that I had when we made Future Sound of Mzansi, all my friends, they got their own things. There's other content creators. So you're just coming into a world that is not really appreciative of everything I just mentioned.
This is the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a journey into the life and perspectives of Africans living on their own terms. I also have an email newsletter, a book, and even music playlist available on my site, kojobuffer.com. Let's get back to the conversation. How do you define the success for yourself in something like that? And I asked it because for me, I see parallels with having published a book.
I've been meaning to ask you about that.
And trying to, which I'm still grappling with.
Yes.
One, recognizing that it's a time thing in a world where everybody's still pushing it's like the attention is for the 1, 2, 3 months after it comes out. But then recognizing that, but you've created something that will exist for long.
Yeah.
And therefore, I mean, like sales have been so-so, but sales were like in those first couple of months. And I was right in the middle of COVID. I mean, when I did the signing and literally you couldn't come in, and it was literally 2 days after the second wave or the third, whatever wave was starting, and trying to navigate all of that. But then reading about people who came out of the book and then it only sold like 5 years later because you've created something that is for not necessarily for posterity, but it's for an extended period of time. But seeing my sales figures in the first quarter after the book came out, and then the second quarter after the book came out, and going from double-digit sales to single-digit sales, where you're like, okay, there's thousands of people out there. And you sold 15 books, and trying to make sense of that in a world where it's New York Times bestsellers and blah blah blah, but also
by your own metrics of success, whatever they might be, how do you view your book?
I didn't have clear metrics of success, and maybe that's part of I had no context. So in the beginning, people would say, so how are the book sales going? And I'm like, I don't know because I have no context. I have no reference point. It's the first time I'm doing this. Today, I'm probably even less clear on what that is, and more focused on the fact that, yes, I have a book out. And sometimes, I mean, regularly I think about, okay, what can I do to promote the book or get the book out a bit more. To start off the year, I literally WhatsApped friends in the US because I was like, okay, well, my market or my community is a small community. It's a small reading community. So in South Africa, because this is where my home is, there's a small reading community, and there's even a smaller group of people who would be interested in hearing my story specifically, right? There are those who have heard about it and have got the book. There are those who have heard about it and haven't got the book. And there are those who haven't heard about it. But in my mind, if I ever want sales that are, beyond like 100 or beyond 1,000, I would need to get it in front of people outside of my circle.
Yes.
And let's say English speaking parts of the world, even non-English speaking, like English speaking people in Europe. In the US, because the US is so big and has such a large population, 0.01% of a particular city has a major impact on let's say my sales, etc. As compared to somebody there. So it's been that, and it's also just been trying to get in front of people that I think would appreciate what I wrote about.
Yeah.
And some aspect of it would resonate.
Yes. I mean, it is quite a challenging moment for literature, books specifically, in just universally, right? Just I don't know what the word. I don't know. I'm still unconvinced, but the notion that people have far less of an attention span because of the internet, and you'll hear people like, the internet makes you internet. I was just like, how can you measure cognitively people's attention span? That, and I just don't buy it. But there is that conversation. Friends who just like, I mean, my wife was like an avid reader. She's got like bad eyes because she used to read underneath, But I guess it's maybe like time and stuff. I don't know. It is quite a difficult moment, but there is just so much like value. Like I think the story with the running. I think the story about the first time, I don't know, you got into trouble on the sort. I think your dad is the first time you speak about your dad beating you up or something like that when you're super naughty. I was just like, it's just, and it's so it's also easy because all the stories.
But you see, I mean, the way I wrote it. So I wrote it easy for me because that style of writing I've been doing for years. Because it's like writing a magazine column.
Yeah.
So it's easier to digest than if I'd written even an autobiography or a memoir in the traditional sense that runs chronologically, for example.
Like Rawls, Michael. Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, look, I do believe that our attention span.
Do you believe that?
Yeah, in general, and it's not just with literature. So
it's films.
It would affect you as well. And I say that because I watch my children. So my son makes beats and then puts out an EP. And the EP is like 9 minutes. And I'm like, dude, how do you have 6 songs? And the whole thing is like 9 minutes. And I watch them watching things. And everything they engage with is like bite-sized. So something I've been trying to figure out how to articulate and write about it's literally been the last week, was the realization that we have become so accustomed to dealing with the world in sound bites. So, and I was scrolling through Instagram and every other video is like some profound statement, but it literally is packaged as a soundbite.
Yeah.
And everybody's having a conversation on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there was a longer video, but nobody's gone to YouTube
to watch the longer video.
To watch the longer video. I don't think it's irreversible.
Okay.
So I do believe it's about how we train ourselves. So coming back to maybe we need the toxicity that exists on Twitter and these spaces. We need those to crumble to a certain extent to release a hold on our attention and our thinking.
Yeah.
To allow us to now try and reimagine how to reconnect with certain things. So I find I will watch something distracted. I'll play games on my phone and watch something. But I try to be very conscious about it. So it's like, how do I get back to a place where I can watch an episode of something for 44 minutes and not have my phone nearby and not be having conversations?
That book that you put me onto, it's a yellow cover. I want to say distracted, but the opposite.
Oh, Indistractable.
Indistractable.
Yeah.
Every time I got to read that book like once every 6 months.
So and there's a bunch of them. So I went through a phase, like in a year.
Yeah.
I read about 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah.
and some of them even refer to the other ones. The most recent one I finished was Atomic Habits.
Yes, yeah, that's a good one.
Which was the end of my journey through that reading. But yeah, all of that stuff doesn't need you need to kind of go back to it regularly.
Yeah.
There's a book called Deep Work, which was one of the first I read, and it just reminded me of like when I started working. I mean, I started working kind of young, but when I started working full time, where you would sit and, you have a task at hand. So you sit down, you start the thing, and then you look up and an hour has passed. Or you're sitting and you're watching a movie and you get engrossed in the movie and then it ends.
Finished, yeah.
And it's like you're coming up for air. We don't come up for air anymore because it's like we're never that submerged in, for example, work. I mean, some people still are, like if you have to edit something, I mean, editing video and stuff, you need somebody who's focused, not every 10 minutes going, but those are some of the things and it's become habit. So it's about how do you reverse that. So when we were chatting about how I read, and
in my mind, you like sit for like 4 hours, and I don't know why, but you like wearing white Ghanaian robes. He's just like drinking ginger tea and it's wholesome. And you're just like, nah, man, just take 10 minutes a day. You know what I mean? Just make sure you're just deliberate about just getting 10 minutes a day.
And that's how I started.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where sometimes I will sit on a Friday night and go, do I want to watch something? Actually, no, let me read. And then I'll do 2 hours on a book.
Okay.
And it's not a regular thing.
Okay.
But it took me going, I'm going to devote a certain amount of time to reading to get to the point, and it took a couple of years to get to the point where that is now one of my entertainment options.
Like your dad, like it was for your dad.
Yeah. I mean, so my father was a bit more intense because my father didn't read fiction.
Yes. Do you read any fiction right now?
I read, I'm generally always reading at least one fiction book.
Okay.
Because I read fiction for entertainment in the same way that I would watch a movie.
Okay.
So I also get into authors. So 2 weeks ago, I was just like, I need to find some new authors to get into on the fiction space because I've read most of the stuff. I mean, like I was into Anne Rice, who wrote Interview with the Vampire and a whole series. I read a bit of fantasy. Years ago, I used to read more your spy stuff, but I kind of grew out of it. So it's now finding that there's a Japanese writer that I'm getting into. I'm trying one of his novels for the first time. I read a lot of his short stories last year, which I enjoyed. So, and I do read fiction. Because fiction for me is that it's like sitting and deciding, that's where I'll sit and go, do I want to watch a movie or do I want to find out about this random story?
Yeah, it's. I think they're also quite helpful in just helping one switch off.
Yeah,
it's like an opiate. Like it's so great to just watch something, and I think maybe some of it is like, I imagine what a musician is like listening to music, where it's just like you are watching, but you're also like, like it's like. If I'm watching a film, I'm watching a film. It's great because it's entertaining. It's what I do, and I'm learning. But I'm also, there's the voice inside me where I'm just going, what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is reading like that for you? You're like sitting there, and as the sentence is building up, you get to the end of the sentence, you're like, that word? Really?
No.
So you can purely switch off your writer brain and just be a consumer brain.
Yeah.
Which is super important.
Because also I guess my writer brain kicks in when I read something and it's like, fuck that sentence. Like that is such a
such a good sentence.
That's just such a dope sentence.
Yeah.
So it's more in the appreciation rather than I would have written that better. And I never feel like I'd have done something better because
I feel
going back to imposter syndrome.
I feel like 90% of people who are watching and listening aren't watching and listening, aren't consuming for consumption's sake. I think there is a very clear sense of I could do that betterness happening in the world generally, particularly around young people. Because, and I say this because when people hit me up, I remember doing this interview once around Mutant, I can't remember, and someone hit me up, and then I posted the photo of me on TV, and it's just like, yo, next time you go on TV, take me with. I also got a story to tell, right? And that is like such and I'm like, that's dope, and I'm happy for you, and I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper, but people, I don't feel like a lot of people are consuming for consumption, but rather as a blueprint for action.
Yeah.
They're watching to learn so they can become that thing, not so just they can consume and enjoy the thing for what it is.
I got a story to tell. Did I write about it? I had a phone call from somebody once, a young man from Soweto, and I was still a Destiny man. And I was in the car with my son.
He called you on your cell phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even know how he got mine, but that's neither here nor there. But my son was in the back seat. We were going for a haircut in Sandton, and he was in his car seat. So he must have been 4 years
like
old.
11 years ago.
And this guy phones me and says he wants a column in Destiny Man because he has a story to tell.
Wow.
And so the crux of it was, I said to him, okay, well, there's 4 columns in the magazine currently. Which one should I take out?
To give you yours.
Because he had talked about also, like, he liked, and there were 4 different types of columns. And he talked about the ones that he liked and etc. So I was like, okay, I work with limited space.
It's literally your business is selling space.
I can't add, because to add pages, I need to add 8 pages. Because that's how it works in the printer. At a minimum 4. Because it's one sheet of paper that's folded, right? And he didn't have an answer for me. Because I was like, well, to get a column, so when I was coming up, the first time I got a column, it for me meant that I'd done enough writing. And I'd built enough of a reputation that people are like, okay, we'll give you a page to talk about what you feel like talking about.
Because you earned it.
Because you've earned it. So what the internet did was it democratized voice.
Which I'm grateful for, because I was able to benefit from that.
There's lots of positives to it. One of the things I used to say back in the day was, it's great that the internet has given us voice, but not everybody should necessarily have voice, because there's a responsibility attached to it. And if you come from particular spaces, you are taught that responsibility. I mean, I didn't study. I did BCom. I did economics, marketing and business administration. Writing is something I just always did and I grew into. But when I was in magazine, anything that went out in the magazine, I would be held accountable for. Like, number of conversations I had about covers, magazine covers. And the magazine cover, the decision who's going to be on the cover was not solely mine. And even if I disagreed with who eventually ended up on the cover, I was the face, so I had to go out and defend it. So there's there's consequences, there's implications, and there's a responsibility to it. But this democratization, which, like we're saying, it has lots of positive benefits. I mean, the fact that you and I can have this conversation and
1000%.
In a couple of days it's going to be sitting on the internet, right? It's positives, especially for us as Africans. But you have a lot of people kind of coming up without knowing without having to go through certain parts of the journey, certain painful parts of the journey, and therefore it's like, okay, because I have a thought, the world must hear that thought.
There's two things. The one is it becomes particularly difficult because what it sounds like, even though it's not, but what it does sound like is that what we are saying is you need to adhere to the principles of the craft. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
But what someone might hear is that in order for you to become a part of this thing, you have to go through what we decide is acceptable, which is a gatekeeper, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to be able to distinguish between us sounding like gatekeepers versus us saying, no, we just need you to adhere to the principles. But when you take it into like sort of social space, there were people that probably said the same thing to us as black men trying to participate in these particular spaces. And they were just like, you can't just come up, you have to adhere to principles. But back then, because of the context, when, if you've got like, say like, someone of a particular kind of demographic in a particular space telling you that you need to do all these things, you need to jump through all these hoops to be able to get to where I am, as an act of defiance, which at the time was seen to be quite brilliant and quite daring, you're like, no, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to figure it out my way. What is like, how do we like manage that inherent kind of conflict of saying to people, you need to master the craft before you can subvert it, and not sounding like you're saying, do as I do, otherwise you're not going to be recognized within a particular space?
So the challenge for me has always been this. I did not grow up with that context you're talking about. Right? So I grew up in Masera. My father was a lecturer and then went into business. As an 11-year-old, I spent New Year's Eve at an Ethiopian restaurant in Washington, D.C. with my father and my older sister. Because we took the Greyhound bus from upstate New York to New York, but we went the long way around because my father wanted us to experience,
What time of year is this? New Year? Oh, so it was winter. Christmas. Yeah. Okay, it was freezing.
I had white Christmases most of my childhood.
Even in Masera?
Not in Masera, because Masera is in the middle of summer.
Oh, sorry.
But I used to get shipped off to, I think the youngest I remember being put on a plane to go to Germany to relatives I didn't know. I was like 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I used to have white Christmases.
Yeah.
So I was exposed to the world in a way. I mean, my father being from Ghana, having lived in Germany for many years and then moving to Lesotho and going to a high school with different nationalities, people from all over the world, how I saw myself within the world would be very different from somebody in South Africa. Absolutely. With all the challenges.
Absolutely.
Like my father was banned in South Africa. So as it was, we didn't spend time in South Africa. Like I flew, in those days was Jan Smuts International Airport.
Yeah.
Like that's what I knew of South Africa as a 12-year-old. Sitting on a plane, landing in Joburg, getting another plane, flying out to Europe. So because of that, I've been fortunate enough that I was taught to believe that any space I decide that I need to be in, or any space that I'm in, I am deserving of being in that space. So as a starting point already, that's let's say my advantage. So if I want to do something, yes, we talked about imposter syndrome, but if I want to do something, I mean, like I worked in television, I produced for television. I created TV shows.
What TV shows you create?
I worked on Africafe,
Yes.
Making Moves.
I remember Africafe.
My first job in television was Zoashu, a Venda Tsonga lifestyle magazine show, doing research.
Oh, wow.
And it was because of my relationship with people in the company.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is the challenge is not being a gatekeeper, but I think as important, or for me more important, and that's what I guess to a certain extent the purpose of these conversations and this podcast is what you talked about, craft, is recognizing that it doesn't matter what you want to do. There's work that needs to go into getting there. It's and that's about you and what you're doing and what you want to do. You cannot control, let's say, the gatekeepers. If the gatekeepers, you cannot control or decide whether doors will be opened or should be open to you. All you can really control is what you're doing. So the obstacles I've had in South Africa are different because I'm a foreigner.
Oh, still.
So certain people talk about opening up the industry and being able to access certain spaces. I had to work hard to access certain spaces because I'm not a South African. Whereas with certain things it would have been easier. And I don't sit and lament it. It just is what it is. So it's recognizing, okay, these are the challenges I may have that are different from other people's challenges. Everybody's facing challenges. So how do I operate within that particular context?
A light-skinned dude called Kojo who speaks fluent Soto.
Yeah.
It's quite a thing because the language buys you. So you've got all these different ways in which there's things that buy you in, but equally there's certain things that like almost exclude you from.
Absolutely.
That's quite an yeah.
And it is what it is.
Yeah.
So I don't spend time going, oh my God, woe is me.
Right.
It's just kind of like, well, that's what I have.
I was on set and I remember it was in Cape Town and I was still a young director and I was a tech recce and I started explaining the shoot. And it was inconceivable to the guys that I was the director. I think one of the stunt guys, it was a massive job, gave me a camera to be like, hey, listen, I'm going to do practice some stunts. Can you record for me? And I was like, sure. And then I was busy recording him. And then his boss was just like, why did you give the director? He's just like, oh, you know what I mean? And then I started talking, nobody listened. Then the DOP, he was an old Afrikaans guy, he started talking. Then everybody started listening. And then he was just like, okay, now that I've got everybody's attention, now the director has got something to say. And it felt like that was such a very sort of omen. And even to this day, whether or not that is the case, every time I get into set, and because of just the consequence of how the industry set up, all the gaffers, the grips that it had, all of them are all the white dudes. And I still fight that to this day. When I get on set, I'm still that young kid who was ignored and disregarded on my own job, where I'm essentially hiring all these people and getting paid for me, and I have to get someone else as a proxy to talk for me before they listen to me. And that is the tension of like, I know what it felt like to be excluded from an industry, and only over the years, I mean, like I said, I still have my own hang-ups and my own insecurities, but then to go out and say, you know, like, those people made me jump through hoops. And it took a while to earn their respect. And even though I might get it, I still don't feel like I have it. And that's really the syndrome we speak of. But then then come out and say to people, yo, this is what you got to do to make it feels like I am the same white man that ignored me on set. And I'm trying to find a way to not be that person, but also to say, work and get over your hang-ups and do what you got to do to be able to be taken seriously because you are good and talented and hardworking.
Yeah.
How much time do we have left? I think we've gone over.
This is longer than most, but this is also very different because we've been talking. Like, I haven't asked you anything really, so it's fine.
You asked me one question. What do you want to do when you grow up?
Yeah, no, it's cool.
To an hour and a half later.
That's the other beauty of this. It's what I put out, right?
Yeah.
Like, whatever I decide to put out is what goes out. I think what we're talking about, the important thing is for young people to, and it's not I mean, it feels like a generalization, but it's not. But the importance of craft, the importance of, so it's not gatekeeping in terms of
Okay.
accessing spaces, but it's going, whatever it is that you want to pursue, work on the craft of it. And I say that at a time when it feels like people just want to automatically have doors opened for them because there've been certain barriers to entry. And it's like, okay, but yeah, what are you bringing? And the focus is on getting the access and not on the, okay, once the door is opened, what am I going to do? You know, in some instances, it's a global thing where you see somebody who wants to go from, you know, account executive to marketing director in 6 months. Because certain sectors and certain spaces have been blocked for many people. And my thing still is craft. Craft is the thing that's important to me. So, and when I say, I mean, so what's interesting, the flip side of this is, like I talked about my son who makes beats.
Yes.
And I've had to hold myself back.
Interesting.
Because of my work and because of my network and because of my relationships, he has access to spaces that his peers do not have access to. Because he could go from making beats on his phone to a studio quite easily. Because I have enough friends in the industry. I have people that I've known for 20, 25, 30 years who are in various aspects of the music business, from record companies, you know, through to producers, artists, etc., etc. So for me to unlock that door and open that door for him is very easy.
You could have these beats on Kaya FM on Hobart or show within like 5 minutes.
Right. But also then realizing that he does it because he loves doing it. He sells beats to friends. And I'm thinking royalties, and you must fill in there's paperwork attached to it so that it goes in Samro, and like I know about resale and all of these things, and it's like, actually, do you know what? He enjoys doing it. If at some stage he goes, okay, this is what I want to do for a living, then I can open the doors for him. But why must he do it? Why must I immediately start thinking about, okay, monetizing and professionalizing, etc.? It doesn't need to be like that. And that's my bigger lesson in the last year, in terms of being able to do things because you want to do them, because you enjoy doing them. Not everything has to be about monetization. Not everything has to be about. I mean, when I was growing up, we still used to write our hobbies on our CV. Like it was a line on your CV. Like,
oh wow,
on your CV it was a line, like reading, writing, watching TV.
Oh
like,
wow, that's remarkable.
Right? And now all of a sudden, we
That's so interesting.
people don't have hobbies anymore, right? And I want him to be able to live like that, to be able to, this is the things you do for a living, but also you don't have to go into the industry if you haven't a particular ability. But the key to anything is a craft. So even if he's doing it as a hobby, I still expect him to learn and be better at the thing.
I think what's also super important about what you're saying, particularly for people like us who have had the privilege to earn money from the things we enjoy doing, is people don't realize how difficult it can be.
Yeah.
Particularly if we were talking about this earlier. If every time I'm making an advert, whatever, that's my livelihood. So if I'm not working, and it can totally happen. I mean, I remember last year I didn't earn for like 6 months. So I can go for 6 months and as a father, and like
Yeah.
you can have a scenario in which it is, the bills don't go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
COJ wants the electricity bill, whether or not there's load shedding. Yeah, so it's super important I think it's such an important lesson to say you not everything has to be monetized.
Yeah.
And if you want to make money, then you should go out into the world and go become a banker or an actuary and go make money through ways in which people make real money.
Because it's also just you can make real money doing the things that you love. It's just being clear in terms of what you're doing for the money and what you're doing
for the love of the craft.
For the love of the craft.
And maybe that's where we differ, I suppose.
Yeah. Cool. Let's close that because we could go on for another hour. Thank you very much for your time.
Cool, man.
This was very unique, very different from how I've done these episodes up till now. Thank you for listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe and or leave a comment wherever it is you're listening. To access the book, there are links on the website www.kojobafa.com. If you're interested, there's also a curated email newsletter that I put out fortnightly to monthly. You can subscribe at zebraculture.substack.com. I hope you enjoyed listening and walk away with something that makes your world a little bit easier.